There we go. Thank you very much, Dr. Desmond. And I'm once again going to double check that you can hear me okay. Great. My name is Nick Tepe. I'm the director of Athens County Public Libraries, and all of us at the library are very proud and happy to be a supporter of the Grover Lecture this year and the events happening earlier today and here tonight, and also to support the community read of Poverty by America throughout the community. So we have some folks who are out there who will take index cards with questions from you, and they'll relay them up here to the podium. We also have somebody transcribing questions from online, and those will also be brought up to the podium. But to start things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the themes that I saw in the book, Dr. Desmond, which was fear. One passage that really stuck out to me was, when the ground feels unsteady underfoot, we tend to hunker down and protect our own, growing less willing to consider what we have and more apt to pay mind to what we could lose. We're coming to you tonight from Nelsonville, Ohio, which at one point in time, about 100 years ago, was the heart of the coal mining industry in Appalachian, Ohio. And over the last 100 years, the coal has gone away, coal mining companies have gone away, and that economic base collapsed. So folks who live in this area experience the ground getting pulled out from underneath them. And it seems like a very reasonable response that they would be afraid that something like that would happen to them again if they gave up what they had. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how to respond to folks who are experiencing that fear when we say we have the ability to end poverty if we just give up a little bit of what we have.
Yeah, well, that message is not for the unemployed coal miner. That message is not for, folks that have lost a solid blue collar lifestyle and now are making, you know, $13 an hour in a service industry job. This message is for affluent Americans. This message is for affluent Americans. Now, do you count yourself among that? And that's kind of the question, because a lot of us are prone to kind of point to the person richer than us, often astronomically richer than us, and say, well, if Elon Musk or if Jeff Bezos would get their act together, we'd be in a better place. And that seems like a very fair critique and also a very absolving one. So many Americans kind of have a tendency to focus on what they lack and are less in touch with focusing on what they have. Like, for example, like in COVID, I think we bought like 300,000 powerboats as a country. Like, you know, like we spend billions of dollars every year on our pets. 1 in 8 Americans have a second home or a timeshare. That's a lot of us. And so I think that, look, if you're hurt and if you're beat down, if you're below the poverty line, I want to bring you power and I want to bring you community. If you're one of the Americans that are benefiting from the imbalanced safety net, I want you to have a hard conversation with your partner tonight about, do we have to claim all the taxes we are entitled to, that kind of thing. So
Thank you. I got a couple of questions here that are database questions and or data-based questions. One of the things I really appreciated about the book and about your work in general is how much detailed work you go into to pull the data and show the evidence. And so I'm going to give you both of these at the same time here. One question was the subsidies to the top 20% of households. How have those changed since the war of poverty in the 60s? And also, how would you advocate for better methods of calculating the poverty rate in this country?
the second question is actually a super controversial one among academics that study poverty. And there's a lot of disagreement actually and fights about how poverty should best be studied. There is an argument, though, that I'm fairly sympathetic to that suggests that if we want to study poverty, we shouldn't study it as like an abstract thing. Like, what does the poverty rate mean? It should be more concrete. So, do you have access to health insurance? Can you afford your bills solidly every month? Have you ever gone hungry? Are you facing eviction? What percentage of your income are you paying to rent? Like the tangible, concrete hardships of poverty. This is actually how they measure poverty in other countries like Britain. And I think that we can learn something from that. Um, so that would be my cut at the second question. The first question about like how have tax breaks changed since the war on poverty, I think a quick answer to that is to say they've expanded. We've had these two major tax cuts since then. The first was under Ronald Reagan's administration, and the second one was under Trump's first administration. Um, giant tax cuts that have included, big tax cutouts for the wealthy. And like, look, many of these tax cuts are incredibly hard to justify morally or sociologically. So if I told you that, there are certain tax benefits where, 97% of folks that claim it were affluent white folks, that would be troubling, but that's kind of what the inheritance tax is. Or think of the humble mortgage interest deduction, which is often pitched as like a middle class deduction. But over 84% of the mortgage interest deduction goes to white folks. And most folks who claim the mortgage interest deduction are making $200,000 or more as a family. So, like, I wouldn't have a big problem with something like that if we didn't have a housing crisis, right? So it's like homeowners are entitled to one of the sweetest cutouts in the tax code, and only 1 in 4 families who qualify for any kind of like affordable housing receive it. Then that just seems morally indefensible to me.
Thank you. We have a couple of things up here about, in particular, healthcare, but also in general, the current state of things in the federal government and access to all the various different support programs that are out there. But I do want to talk a little bit about the healthcare piece of it specifically, because our area was dramatically and continues to be dramatically hurt by the opioid epidemic and the subsequent developing issues with substance use disorders in our area. And that's tied to pain, which was another theme that came up in your book. But it appears that a lot of the healthcare options that are available out there are not particularly compassionate. Or in terms of trying to find ways to actually solve these problems. And of course, now we're hearing word from Washington that Medicaid, which is one of the primary ways that those issues in our area is treated, is potentially under threat. So I was wondering, what do you see as what we could try to aim for in terms of providing compassionate, competent healthcare to everybody?
This country has just struggled from the get-go to establish a healthcare system that makes financial sense and that serves many Americans. So when FDR was fighting for the New Deal, he introduced the idea of government health insurance, and he lost. He lost that debate because doctors, actually, and the American Medical Association did not want government intervention into their lives. It took the war on poverty and the Great Society to reboot something like government health insurance with Medicare and Medicaid, but we did it in a way that like no one would ever do it. Like we were like, we're going to design a government health insurance for like the elderly and the poor and disabled folks. And so it's really a fiscally vulnerable system. The good news is Medicaid is a pretty efficient government program. Like it delivers fairly high quality care at an efficient cost. It can cap drug prices and it caps medical costs. And so, cutting Medicaid is the idea of taking a program that works really darn well and it is serving millions of Americans today and getting rid of it for what exactly? There's no answer to that. And look, the, you know, what's go- what's going on at the federal government right now in terms of gutting and firing workers, you know, without much understanding or any understanding, frankly, of what they're doing, and this being done by you know, led by the richest person in the world. I mean, that's like, what is the moral argument for that? That seems immoral on biblical standards. And so I I'm fearful, for the most vulnerable families today, I'm frankly disgusted with the way that it's happening in such a glib, uncaring manner.
Like, we're just about out of time, and I have a kind of a common theme between some of the questions that came up here. In the book, you talk about a lot of very practical, actionable steps that we can take to begin this fight against this, to work towards abolishing poverty. Things like strengthening unions, things like finding ways to support affordable housing projects. We talked about the low-income housing tax credit projects in Athens earlier today, and other things along those lines. And the question that really stuck out to me amongst all of these ones up here was, other than signing up on the website, do you have any thoughts about what we can do to get started here locally to begin to organize groups that might be able to take these sorts of actions?
Yeah, I mean, one way or one idea is to kind of leverage your connections with institutions that are existing and ask, what are we doing? And so for those of us that are members of a church, for example, what are we doing to address poverty in our own backyards? Like, I would love to see more faith communities get involved in undercutting payday lending industries, and saying, why are these families, they need $100 to keep the lights on. They end up paying $500 for that. That doesn't make any Christian sense. Could we, extend low interest loans to folks we know, in our community? Where's the church at on this? Where are our schools at, on this? Our libraries are there. Our libraries are there, open to everyone and doing their part. And so, but there's also these big thinking we can do, like the New York City library system, for example, is saying, should we build affordable housing on top of our buildings? Is that something we can do? And so I think that one place to start is by recognizing where we have influence and community already, and building off that. Another place to start is personal moral action. And this is the thing that I think gets lost a lot in this debate, where poverty looks like so structural and big, almost like historically heavy, that we're like, Congress has got to do something. Someone else has got to do something. Or, we're just kind of blaming it or putting it on someone else, like pick your politics. And I think that I would like us to say, okay, I'm not okay with this, and I'm going to take one tangible step um, to do something different. And so, for example, I have kids. They grow really fast, and the other day it was time to buy new pants for the kids, and so it was like, all right, what company is building new, designing new pants, and how can we support them? And the thing is, you got to do some homework in America actually to find that out. But there's two organizations that are good at this. So B Corps, so just the little letter B in core, evaluates companies for how well they're treating their workers and how well they're treating the world. And then there's a group called Union Plus, which says, hey, you want to buy some candy? Here's some candy that's union made. You want to mail a package? UPS says is unionized. FedEx isn't. Why don't you consider the guys in brown shorts? And so I think that those decisions actually can add up to something where we're changing the common sense about poverty. And let me give you one more, which is like taxes. Tax time's coming up. So tax time, usually like your neighbor leans across the fence and you're like, taxes, down. Yeah, everyone says this, like left, right, center, whatever. Like we all hate paying taxes. So what if we started looking at it a little differently this year? What if the next time the neighbor said that, you kind of looked at your mortgaged home and said, yeah, it's crazy. I get a big fat tax benefit on my home. And like there are a million public school kids that are homeless today. So what I do what I did this year is I'm going to give away my mortgage deduction to my local homeless shelter. Then I wrote my congressperson saying, like, why are you doing this for families like me? I don't need this. Now that's an awkward conversation, but we do that as a family, and I think that it's a way that we can start in our daily lives pushing against the normalization, the routinization of poverty, and just remember that we're part of the system, which also means we're part of the solution.
And I think that that is a fantastic place to end, a very inspirational note to end on. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you all coming out, and wish I could be there with you, but I hope to see you the next time. So thank you.
Thank you. So we'll transition to our panel now. We're going to make their way up here to the stage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Theo. I'm going to be moderating this panel. Some of you may recognize my voice. I'm a reporter with WOUB Public Media. I report on children and poverty in Southeast Ohio, and I've lived here on and off since I was 2 years old, I believe. We're going to go ahead and get started with some panelist introductions. Panelists, if you could do what I just did, tell everyone here who you are, a little bit about what you do, and what your connection to this area is.
Yes, thank you, Theo. My name is Peggy Lee. I'm a senior staff attorney with Legal Aid of Southeast and Central Ohio. My program helps eligible clients who are low income. They don't exceed a certain percentage of the poverty line. We help them for free at no charge with civil legal matters, including eviction and other subject matter. And so I am not native to this area. I was born in Canada and I grew up in California. But when I went to law school, I knew I wanted to help those who really don't have a voice or a loud enough voice in society. And I knew I wanted to do legal services or legal aid as a career. And I moved here in 1996 for my job with Southeastern Ohio Legal Services. Now we merged, therefore we're now Legal Aid of Southeast and Central Ohio. So I've been here since 1996 with a little small break. I went up to Rochester, New York for about 5 years and came back. So it's been almost 30 years, 25 of them here in Athens or in Appalachian, Ohio.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Rose Frech, and I am the Grant and Business Development Administrator at Integrated Services for Behavioral Health. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are a community mental health, substance use disorder treatment, and housing organization. We serve 21 counties across the region. We serve over 12,000 people a year and employ about 700 people. I myself am a social worker. I grew up in Athens. I was born and raised here. I care a lot about this region, and I've been working in the human services in Ohio and on poverty issues in Ohio for about 20 years now. And I'm glad to be here with all of you.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me? So I recognize a lot of faces. I am with the Friendship Bench through the health department. I've been working with that for 3 years now, since I guess its inception in Athens, Ohio. If you don't know too much about the Friendship Bench, we are in different places in Athens County, I guess, listening to people and talking if they need someone to talk to. helping them problem solve whatever issue they might have at that time or moment in their lives. I think the way that I came to the friendship bench was just because of my own lived experiences and my abilities to navigate through the different systems within, I guess, poverty.
2 quick follow-up questions. What's your name and how'd you come here?
So sorry. I am Liana Flores. Completely forgot that part. And I actually came to Athens, Ohio as a student in 96. So I started out as a student and decided I liked it here to raise a family.
Awesome. So this first question is going to be for each of you. We can just kind of go down in a line. Each of you regularly encounters poverty in some way in your daily work. And now we've just heard from Matthew Desmond. You're all familiar with his book. How does his book and his work match up with what you all actually see and experience here in Southeast Ohio? And maybe specifically thinking about what is it that makes poverty in this area so persistent? Peggy, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I think being in a rural area like Appalachian, Ohio, lack of choice is a theme that Matthew Desmond talked about, and it's clearly what I've seen through my clients' cases and through their stories that they tell me when I have to interview them about their case. It means not being able to choose often where they want to live. It's choosing what can they afford, especially if they're not in affordable housing. And that means choosing a place that, okay, has rats or has raw sewage in the yard or holes in the wall or, you know, broken plumbing. And it also means that, and again, I just want to shout out to, and I did this earlier, so I just want to make sure WOUB and their Housing Squeeze series gets a look. If you've never seen it online, it's a series of news reports about what the housing squeeze crisis looks in our area. And it's not just the low income, it's also the middle income people who want to live here and work here, but can't find housing. So the reason I bring that up is because Theo did a excellent story about the squalor that our clients face, and you can see pictures of what squalor looks like. And this is something that our clients unfortunately choose, and they're fearful of asking the landlord to repair because of retaliation. They're fearful of losing their housing because where else are they going to be able to live and afford to live? That's what it looks like from what I see.
Rose?
So just to give you a sense of the scope of the issue in our community, Athens County is historically, for many, many years now, been ranked among the worst for poverty across the state. It's about 1 in 4 people in our county who live below the poverty line. And just to give context to that, if you're not familiar with what that means, for a family of 3, 100% of the poverty line is about $26,000 a year, right? So that 1 in 4 figure doesn't even take into account, and Desmond talks about this quite well, right? All of those people who are really struggling financially, but maybe are $20, $30, $50, $100 over that line. And in contrast, so it's about 25% here in Athens County. For the state overall, the poverty rate's about 13%. And sometimes when you talk about poverty in Athens County, folks will say, oh, well, it's the university students, right? They inflate that number. It's artificially inflated because of the university community. And that may be true to a small degree, but we have lots of other data that speaks to the seriousness of the economic distress in this community. So really high rates of food insecurity. About 1 in 5 people are food insecure or don't have regular access to sufficient amounts of nutritious food. High rates of child poverty. I mean, you name it, right? And I think the other part of that for those of us who work in this field or just live in some of these communities is you don't have to step very far from this building, right, to just see the reality of how people have to live in this community. I mean, we consistently hear about folks living with their kids in cars and tents, living in homes that don't have running water. But one thing that I did want to mention that is unique to Athens County and that I think speaks to some of what Desmond talks about is that we also have a very high score when you look at this metric about income inequality. And so what that score looks at is the gap between people who have a lot and people who have very little. And it's a pretty big kind of chasm in Athens County. We're one of the highest in the state there. And so I think that gets to this notion Desmond talks about around this idea of public squalor and private opulence. And so we know that people in Athens County have like very different experiences of living here, right? Depending on where they live within the county and depending on what their income looks like.
And I think you said it quite well. It looks very different. So you might have someone, just for me within the friendship bench, I might talk to someone who would really like to work, but because of their mental disabilities, they aren't able to hold a full-time job. Those that can hold a full-time job, maybe they're afraid of losing it because of transportation. They can't get from their home to their job, which in a car is only 15 minutes away. But if you're using Athens public transport, let's say you live in the Plains, you have to go all the way uptown to Baker Center and then catch a whole nother bus to go out to East State Street. It makes it very difficult to maybe get to work on time, especially if you miss a bus. Or through the Plains, let's say there's 2 buses, one of them isn't running that day or for the weekends at this point. So transportation is an issue, not to mention substance abuse disorders. There are many people here that might not have housing because there's so many reasons. Maybe a landlord kicked somebody out because they were yelling and screaming because they have bipolar disorder and they're not taking their meds. Well, maybe they're not taking their meds because they can't jump through the hoops to obtain Medicaid. So there are so many obstacles and barriers out there that could prevent someone from food, from the medical side of things, from housing.
And Liana, I'd like to stick with you for a moment for this next question. You mentioned barriers and you mentioned earlier that you have some lived experience. I'd love to hear about maybe help us understand what that actually looks like. You know, we hear about barriers in the abstract. Okay, that sounds annoying. Were there experiences that you encountered where you saw those barriers in action that you're willing to talk about, or have you that you've heard from other folks, sort of concrete examples of what this looks like and what kind of impact it can have?
So yes, thank you. So I started out here at OU in Athens as a student. By the time I was a junior, I found out I was pregnant and became a single mother. Um, Housing, I went from dorm life to living in an apartment. I happened to be very lucky in that I found housing that was affordable and fit right in with sort of like the Athens metropolitan housing stuff. I don't exactly know what it was called. I just know I threw in an application at Carriage Hill and it was accepted. So that was good. But I still had to worry about childcare as I tried to finish school. Um, that and trying to feed both of us was a bit of a challenge. sometimes. And at other times, when I finally did get on food stamps, I was like, wow, this is a lot of money for two people. I didn't understand. But then when I looked at the cost of, let's say, formula, which I was not using, that allotment for food just disappears really, really quick. Um, I would have to miss class in order to meet with those at Jobs and Family Services in order to make sure that I kept current with all of my information. Um, I was lucky and fortunate. I found a car. I found it for $300. My first car cost me $300. Okay. But a lot of people don't luck out and find a vehicle for that little. And then you have to put gas in the car to get to and from wherever it is you need to be, whether it is classes, work. There are numerous amounts of challenges.
Thank you. I'd like to move now to a question that's going to tie into some of the things that I think a lot of folks are seeing on the news, which is regarding federal funding and the role that that plays in efforts here to combat poverty. We've seen, of course, a lot of news about federal agencies having their staffing slashed, a lot of discussion about federal funding cuts. There was an attempt earlier this year to freeze like all federal grants and aid, which then got unfrozen, but there's still a lot of discussion about sort of significantly shrinking the federal budget. Rose, help us understand a little bit what role does that federal funding, including these federal programs that are likely on the chopping block, such as Medicaid, what do they actually do for people, and how do they impact people's actual lives here in Southeast Ohio?
Yeah. So federal funding is really like the lifeblood to our safety net and to services and programs that support poor people. If you look at a program like our food stamp program or the SNAP program, it's almost an entirely federally funded program. Medicaid, which was mentioned earlier and which Theo just mentioned, is our health insurance program for people who are low income. It is a majority federally funded program. As Theo mentioned, both of these programs are looking at what would be historic cuts, like cuts that we have not seen to these programs since their inception. And to just bring this kind of back home, about 60% of kids in Athens County rely on Medicaid as for their insurance coverage. And about a third of kids in Athens County use food stamps, right? They have a family that relies on food stamps. So I don't think it's like hyperbole to say that if we see reductions to these programs, right, things get really, really hard, really, really fast for low income families.
And what does that mean?
Okay.
Really, really hard, really, really fast. I mean, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, think about one of the points of data that Desmond mentioned, which is just so startling, and just is that so it's about 25% of folks who rely on SNAP benefits who report zero income, right? That means the only income coming into their family is their SNAP benefits. And just for those of you who might not know, food stamp benefits are for food stuff, right? So they won't allow you to purchase things like taxables if you need tampons or you need trash bags or all the kinds of things that we rely on in day-to-day life. So to even just kind of try to wrap your head around what it would be like, right? To be in that situation to begin with, but then to all of a sudden say, hey, maybe the $400 in food stamps that you were getting, in the blink of an eye, maybe it's only 100. And maybe that's the only income coming into your house. So I think it can be very scary really quick. And one of the things that we don't have in our community and in many other small rural communities is we don't have the same kind of philanthropy or private charitable resources that wealthy and urban areas have. They call that the philanthropy gap. And it's not because people here are not generous, right? And they don't want to give. Most everybody I've come across in this community is incredibly generous. It's because we don't have the same kind of generational wealth and corporate presence that you would typically associate with big multi-million-dollar gifts like you see in big cities. So when those public dollars go away, right, there is no way that even those of us who are called to help would be able to fill the gap and make sure that people are getting the food and the healthcare that they need.
Can I add just one thing to
Please
this?
do.
So it's great that Rose brought up the statistic about having zero income and getting food stamps. But think about this. If you have zero income, what does that mean? Do you have housing? Most likely not, unless you're in affordable housing. And good luck getting food stamps if you don't have a secure address to get mail from. And if you miss a notice saying you need to come into the office because we need to reaffirm that you have zero income, you're going to get kicked off. And then good luck requesting a state hearing if you get your mail, because you might not get your mail.
Yeah, thank you. So before I ask my next question, I'd just like to let the audience know there is going to be a Q&A portion. So please, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, I believe you all still have note cards. Write your questions down. I would love to get some really good questions from all of you. One question that I did just get handed, which I think is interesting and I'd like to ask is, given how involved all of you, and actually this follows up kind of nicely on what you were just talking about, Rose. Given how involved all of you are in our community, you not only see the things that people struggle with, but also the strengths or the assets that we have here. Given that we are currently bracing for this, potentially very big reduction in federal funding, and acknowledging that that is a problem no matter how you slice it, what are some of the strengths or assets that exist here, perhaps untapped assets that exist here, that communities here can leverage and take pride in going forward? And I'll open that up to anyone.
Well, I'll speak on behalf of the clients that I've dealt with over the years, and I will say that if anything, the Appalachian populations, the low-income Appalachian population here they're very resilient. They're very resourceful, and they're very family devoted. And I think that they share a lot of the same dreams and hopes and goals as those of us who have, are lucky enough to not have to live in that kind of poverty line standard. I do think that Athens, especially within the city where there's so many different agencies that provide services, I do think that we, especially given that we have this wonderful Athens Foundation project co-create, where we did that. We came together because there was a need to address the homelessness in our area. And now, as a result, our excellent community action agency, HAPCAP, was able to secure an American Rescue Plan Fund grant that is now through the state to build the Sunset Motel shelter. That is a low barrier shelter for the area. If we didn't have that, I can only imagine the loss of funding, creating a whole bunch more homelessness, and where are they going to go? So I do think that within the city, we have a lot of great people with a lot of great agencies that we can come together, and we've shown it. We've shown that through the co-create project. We can come together, and people are resilient. We can figure out things, and I believe we can make it happen. We've seen it in concrete ways with the Sunset Motel project. We've seen it through the dedication of folks like the Gathering Place and their desire to get Conestoga huts available for the homeless who are not able to otherwise secure housing. And I do believe that we will find something that we can do for the folks who don't have much.
I would second everything that Peggy said there, and just kind of just to expand on that. I mean, the level of collaboration in this community is unlike any that I've seen, and I've worked with communities all across the state, and it's really pretty unreal when you look at the leadership at our local nonprofits and government agencies, how accessible these folks are, how really smart and sharp and just, willing to come to the table like without ego, which is just pretty remarkable. I just feel like honored to work alongside the people in leadership in this community. And that's rare, right? It really is rare. And so I think in that way, we are in really good hands with folks who are making decisions about the future of the community. But I also just would like to, I want to shout out, we have wonderful people in leadership, but we also have wonderful people who are really like boots on the ground, responding every day to helping people navigate these systems. So like the folks at the friendship bench, the hundreds of people that we employ at Integrated who are actually in folks' homes, helping them sign up for benefits, helping them make sure they get to their healthcare appointments, and really walking alongside folks as they are trying to survive in this community. So it really is a special place in that way. And I think there's a lot of hope to be found in that.
I think one thing I want to add though too is, the different community meals that we have, all the volunteers that it takes to do that, run that, not to mention the warming center that was set up fairly quickly. A call was put out online on Facebook, just Facebook. Hey, what can we do? And there were people answering, responding, and within less than a week, we had something going.
I'd like to take a moment to talk a little bit about housing, which is something that Desmond talks about in his book. As Peggy mentioned, my colleague David Forster and I have written about that. In fact, shout out to David, who just published a new story in that housing series today. So it's about zoning. Yeah. So Peggy, I'd like to ask you sort of, you talked a lot about substandard housing and the challenges that folks here face with regard to substandard housing. When we think about, and in the spirit of thinking about solutions and assets, how do we think about solving the substandard housing problem? Problem.
Well, to bring up a concrete example, it didn't happen in Nelsonville, but it could happen anywhere. Just you saw the video reel that Dr. Desmond presented. There is a proposed, development on Pomeroy Road in Athens, and the developer, through the public meetings, encountered so much misinformation being said. Ironically, one of the main instigators is actually the head of a landlord property company. So I found that kind of ironic. And eventually the developer withdrew his bid for zoning application for restructuring, and is not currently pursuing the development.
And why is a development like that important? I mean, why are we talking about that in the context of the substandard housing that you brought up earlier?
Okay, so we talked about lack of choice, as does Dr. Desmond in his book. We're not just talking about in the abstract people choosing to live in such horrible conditions. They don't have a choice. There is a shortage of affordable housing just straight across the board. Doesn't matter if you're in Athens or Nelsonville or the Plains or Albany, Chauncey, McConnellsville. It's all the same. There's a lack of affordable housing. And I know to some extent, some of it could be based on an algorithm that there's certain companies where property management companies belong to, and this algorithm allows them to dictate what their rents are, and people will pay it because they have nowhere else to go. And with people losing their homes because of either the pandemic or prior to that, the recession, rentals became the new thing to invest in. And so you see a lot of out-of-state investors getting involved. And I think Dr. Desmond talked about that as well. So it's important because we don't have enough affordable housing in this area. Thankfully, we did allow let's draw that back. There is a program called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which is the only way to currently get meaningful quantities of affordable housing built or meaningful rehabilitation of existing properties done now. There is no more public housing, no more Section 8 new construction, Section 8 rehabilitation. That is no longer the case. LIHTC, as it's called, is the only way to get it done. This Pomeroy Road project was going to be a LIHTC project, but because of the misinformation that was said at the public meetings, the developer felt that he could no longer move forward. And we have Kershaw Green because of LIHTC. It was a miracle that we were allowed to have multifamily housing because of the lack of population density in our area. Most developers will not even come to Appalachian, Ohio, or rural areas generally. Because why? They're not going to make the same level of profit as they would in larger cities or suburbs. So for us, any kind of affordable housing development is absolutely necessary. And as you heard Dr. Desmond say, it will not bring down property values if it's high quality. Like, go look at Kershaw Green. I really beg of you. Or the great project, the Nelsonville School Commons. They redeveloped the local school into what I've been in it because I had a client who lived there. I've seen it. It's actually quite nice. And if it weren't for LIHTC, we wouldn't have that. And all of those low income folks who would be on the street now have decent homes. They can actually now think of tomorrow as opposed to right now. That's all they can look at. If you're homeless, right now is all you can think about. You can't think about, getting a job because you don't have a stable address. If you have children, you have to worry about, are they going to be able to get their healthcare needs met? Are they going to be able to have their school needs met? You can't even imagine what it would be like if we didn't have more affordable housing. So that's why it's important.
I wonder a little bit too, though, just on the affordable housing,
Mhm.
what about paying a living wage?
Yes.
There are so many corporations today not paying a living wage. If they did and their employees were able to get a paycheck that would not be eaten up by their rent, that would be incredibly helpful as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing about our area because of the lower population density. What we get is more fast food. And that just continues the problem where they're not paying, $15 or $13 or whatever Dr. Desmond mentioned. Yeah, we're not even close to that.
But I think if we requested or said, hey, you can't build here unless you pay your employees a living wage, I think that would make a difference and send a message.
I'd like to move to some of the questions that I've gotten from folks in the audience. Thank you again for submitting these, and please continue to do so. We have a question here. As Ohio University alumni and members of the community, what suggestions do the three of you have for OU students in particular, or perhaps we can extend that to sort of the Athens bubble more generally, to get out of that bubble and get more involved with the communities around them that aren't just the city of Athens?
Well, I'd like to suggest that if you normally only see the city of Athens or live in the city of Athens, and that's pretty much your main area that you function in. I really hope that you can go and look at the county. I mean, Nelsonville, as somebody said, you just look outside the building and it's not hard to see some of the squalor in some of these residences. Nelsonville does not have I don't believe they have a code enforcement right now. So there's really nobody holding them accountable for problems in the units. And
But how do we? So if you are an OU student, for example, and you want to actually get more involved in these communities, actually spend time in these communities and learn more about them. I suppose they could drive through, but what is a good way for people to do that?
Kids on campus.
It's a
One
great
good big challenge.
suggestion.
Southeastern Ohio Youth Mentoring Services, they have programs within the schools as well. If you ask to volunteer in the schools, you might have to get a background check, but that would afford you the ability to interact with the kids within the region. Going to the local libraries, they have programs within our library of systems daily in different parts of the county. Again, if you are a student, it might be a little bit harder to get around. We still have the Athens Transit, the bus line. It can get you places as long as you're paying attention to the schedules so you don't miss the bus back into Athens. But we also have a wonderful bike path. The bike path will take you straight into the plains. It'll take you all the way into Nelsonville. We're going to have a spur not long from today. I don't know exactly when, but going into Chansey. And you can go the other direction as well.
And one other thing I agree with all that. I would also add volunteering with the Southeast Ohio Food Bank is a great way to get out and interact with the community. But I think it's also a delicate balance, right? Because the university has increasingly taken more serious this idea around experiential learning, and there are constantly kind of efforts to get students more engaged in the community, and that is all good and important and powerful. But there's also that line between how do we make sure we do that in a way that upholds people's dignity, the dignity of the communities that we serve, and that isn't exploitive, right? That it's not like, hey, we're going to go look at the poor people in Gloucester, right, as a part of a student project. So I like the way that the question is framed, right? It's like, so it is. Can you go to the church in Nelsonville and spend time with people there? Can you actually, commit yourself to volunteering beyond 4 hours or something, right? To a project, because it can also be, I can speak from the perspective of somebody who's worked in organizations here, right? Where you get the deluge of emails, right, from students who are like, I need a 3-hour volunteer experience. And it's like, well, it doesn't quite work like that. And so I think it's going to take a lot of just ongoing dialogue between nonprofits, community members in the university to kind of get that balance right.
I'd like to give a shout out to Larry Heyman because his law-related course does feed interns to our office, and we allow them to do housing callbacks. And what that means is when an intake comes in, they're the first line after the initial screening for eligibility. They get to speak first to the actual housing client. And so I've had many interns over the years who have learned directly from the client what they're facing, what they're going through, and hopefully we've made a difference in that person's mindset as far as poverty is concerned. And we take people with us to court. They can see what the court process is like. And we're not just operating in Athens County, we operate in 7 counties: Athens, Meigs, Vinton, Gallia, Washington, Noble, and Hocking. So wherever we have court, we take interns with us, and they can see all of the different myriad ways that poverty can show up.
Awesome. Thank you for those responses. We have a question here, which is interesting and ties a little bit into that. Say there is a need in my town and no resources to address it. What tips do you have for getting organized or getting something started to meet that need?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to the United Athens County Tenants Organization. I think they kind of started from the ground up, and they were just concerned about what housing was like in Athens County, and I don't believe that they had any startup money that they got together. And I will tell you that because of their work in Athens, the city of Athens, they were instrumental in getting the source of income discrimination ordinance passed, as well as the pay to stay ordinance passed.
And I would just say that my short answer to that would be to find partners, right? So if you live in Gloucester, right, and there is a challenge that you are having in your community, there is a very good chance that Albany or the Plains, right, is struggling with something very similar. And so when we look to try to bring resources in and write grants, right, or work with national foundations or something like that, right? When we can come together and kind of tell that global story, I think we have better odds for success. But we can also kind of like build in efficiencies and scale and deploy those interventions a little bit better. So I would say like look for other people who are kind of struggling with the same challenges and then see how you can kind of pool your resources together to fundraise or otherwise kind of try to tackle that issue.
Awesome. I'd like to ask a question that has to do with stigma. This is something Desmond talks about in his book. And you talking about kind of this idea that we've been trained to see the poor as just idle, unmotivated, etc. And that this has a very damaging effect on sort of our efforts to address poverty. And I'd be curious to hear from whichever of you would like to answer whether you have seen these stereotypes in play and how in particular they work in the context of Southeast Ohio and Appalachia.
I think stigma is very real. I think the numbers showed that, when he was talking about how many people don't access services, and a lot of reasons that people don't access services is because they're afraid of what people will think. What will people think of me? Just being in the line with a SNAP card, SNAP benefit, EBT, you got to slide it. WIC benefits, you get stuck there and maybe somebody behind you is mad because something is not ringing up the way it should in a grocery store. So people face it every day. So they choose not to sign up for some of these benefits that are there. I know I'm guilty of it. I chose not to apply for cash benefits. I very well could have qualified, but I chose not to. I wanted to stick with what I thought I needed and nothing more.
And if I could just add something to that, I see stigma and stereotyping show up in our policy debate all the time. And I'll give you a couple of concrete examples of that. One is there's a proposal now, both at the federal level and at the state level, to implement work requirements for Medicaid, right? And at face value, like that doesn't seem like such a bad idea, right? We want people to work, we want people to be able to contribute, but the underlying assumption behind that, right, instituting a work requirement so that people can get health care is that poor folks don't want to work, right? That they're lazy. And that's also just frankly not accurate. Most people who use Medicaid do work. The other one that's getting a lot more attention is this idea that we should put restrictions on the types of food that people who get food stamps can purchase at the grocery store. And again, at face value, you go, well, yeah, of course, we all want people to make healthy choices. But what underlies that is the belief that poor folks can't make good choices for themselves. And so that we need to police their diets, right, in order for them to do so. So I think those are things that are going to have real consequences on the lives of low income people and that are frankly built around false assumptions about poor folks.
Out of curiosity, if I could just follow up on that really quickly, what do you think it would look like if we took away those false assumptions and operated with a more, I guess I don't know what the word is, but a different sort of approach?
Well, it's a great question. And the first thing that comes to mind to me is that if we moved away from the idea that poor people are trying to cheat the system or take advantage of the system, I think, frankly, you could get rid of a lot of the paperwork and the bureaucracy that is currently built into the system, right? Because right now, if you go to sign up for food stamp benefits or cash assistance or whatever, right, you basically are taking on a part-time job of filling out paperwork and verifying and double verifying. And a lot of that is built around this idea, right? That people are going to try to take advantage of this. And so I think if we came into this with the spirit that people aren't going to take more than they need, right? That most people are good and most people are going to work if they can and do their best to contribute. We could frankly make it easier for people to access these services, probably with a lot less shame.
I just want to add that when it comes to Medicaid, my understanding is that the bulk of Medicaid dollars actually is not necessarily the poor, but a lot of it is through estate planning, where loopholes in the law are taken advantage of by heirs who do not want to lose their asset that they would inherit. So the estate is planned so that their parents' nursing home expenses would be covered by Medicaid instead of having the property at risk of being taken because of Medicaid dollars.
So I have a question here, which is interesting. The question simply says, does anyone offer financial literacy classes? And I'd like to add on to that, what just in general resources to improve one's financial literacy and sort of this general area of expertise, what should people do or be aware of in that regard?
I'm not sure of anything currently. I know in the past when I had 3 small children, there was a program on the other side of the square here where the Ohio Extension Office operated out of, but there was also like free clothing and parent resources to help parents navigate and figure out, like maybe what are healthy options to feed kids quickly, affordably, not to mention, I remember there was one program where they did something on budgeting. So learning how to just budget what your income was versus what was going out. I don't know that we do a lot of that today in any of the programs. If we do, I don't know. I would be welcome to learn more about that just because I think there are a lot of families that would benefit from it.
One thing I think I'll just quickly add there is that, at least in my experience, and probably the experience of a lot of people who work in this field, is people who are low income actually have better financial literacy skills than a lot of us who aren't, right? Because they have to try to make it work on very, very little. So they don't have the kind of slack in their budgets that the rest of us do. And you'll often find like they're really, really good at stretching their dollar pretty far.
I concur.
All right. So I think we are almost at time, and I want to make sure we have a moment to talk about. We talked about the assets that this region has and some ways to get involved, but I'd like to give you all a chance to kind of talk about, as Matthew Desmond talks about becoming a poverty abolitionist, things that people can sort of leave this room thinking, okay, I can do that. Maybe even I can start doing that this evening, tomorrow, whatever. What are the efforts that are going on in this town, in this county, in this region right now that you think people could walk out of here and get involved in?
Well, for those of you who like to get DoorDash or things, delivered, one thing that I try to do is I try to give them a tip that would make the job meaningful. Or just your waiter or waitress at your local, wherever you eat. Just give them a tip more than whatever the customary amount is, because they don't have $15 an hour like in some states. Give them a little extra. Try to give them some hope that they're not just getting by.
You can call your Congress people and tell them that you're worried about cuts to Medicaid and cuts to food stamps and what that'll mean for our local community and our local economy. That's very real, and that's something happening right now. But the other thing that Desmond talked about a little bit today that I've been chewing on a lot too is that, we are all a part of groups, institutions, maybe our neighborhood association, maybe a local political party or a faith community. And I think those of us who have privilege and who have some amount of power have a moral imperative to use those settings as an opportunity to speak up when we see exploitation of poor people, when we see bias or prejudice, or, when we see that kind of segregationist attitude that Desmond talks about. And obviously, not everybody has that privilege and that power, right? But if you do, even if it's in a small way, I think that's very meaningful and can especially be meaningful in small communities like this.
I would say I invite you to take advantage of the community meals. Come and sit. Talk to the people who are receiving those meals. Make a donation while you're there to help them get the food out to the people. If you're doing that and you're sitting and you're talking and you're listening, you will hear what they really need, what they want.
How can they figure out where those community meals are happening?
So there's a list. I know it's plastered all over the place. I'm not exactly sure where you can find a list. I think if you Google Athens free community meals, it should pop up. But there is one almost every single night in the community of Athens or even surrounding, because I know there's a couple even here in Nelsonville.
I believe the Athens Independent and probably the other local media advertises those things. The Athens News, the WOUB. Yeah, it's
I know United Campus Ministries puts out the list on the tables, and they are available both Wednesdays and Thursdays. I'm pretty sure we have it available there at Monday lunch. But if you listen and you hear them and you see them and you are compassionate to the people who are sitting there, you'll realize that they're not just a number. They are a face. They're a human being. And I think that goes beyond too with just like realizing with even the stigma behind mental health issues. Okay. Sometimes the trauma, their lived experiences, sometimes they just need a hug. That's all.
Thank you all. We are at time. I'd like to thank each of you for being here and for speaking with everyone. The audience, please join me in giving them a round of applause. And that will conclude our question and answer. I'd now like to introduce Carrie Pigman, the Executive Director of the Athens County Foundation.
Thank you. It's really dark back there. I almost didn't find my way. As Theo said, I'm Carrie Pigman, the Executive Director of the Athens County Foundation, and we are so proud to have partnered in putting this event together. It was really phenomenal to be with all of you here tonight and with many others at Walter Hall this afternoon. It's my honor and challenge to offer a few closing remarks on behalf of all of the partners who made this event possible. As we heard from both Dr. Desmond and our fantastic local panel, we all have a role to play in creating the kind of community where everyone can thrive. Change and progress are not just the responsibility of policymakers, of government officials, or community leaders. That responsibility belongs to all of us. As Dr. Desmond said this evening, we are all part of the system, which means that we are also all part of the solution. Leaving here today, if you're like me, you might be feeling overwhelmed, angry, guilty, but also inspired and motivated. And you may be wondering, what can I even do? Where do I even start? I think that the first step is simple. Stay curious. Pay attention. Challenge your own assumptions about poverty. Listen, truly listen to people in our community who have different experiences than you and different perspectives than you. And then take action. As we heard, that action can take many forms. It might be bold and visible, attending a rally, speaking at a local government meeting, or advocating at the state and federal level. It also can be quiet and personal, making a donation to a local organization, supporting businesses that share your values, or simply reaching out to someone in need. There are real, tangible ways, as we heard, to get involved right now with important work that's happening in our community. There are resource tables out in the lobby, and I encourage you to stop by, sign up for updates on the Sunset Shelter Project, join Project Co-Create at the Athens County Foundation. Those are both initiatives working towards housing security in our community right now. Additionally, there are lots of other helping organizations here tonight, and I encourage you to stop by their tables, get connected, learn more about the work that they're doing, and find out how to be involved. You can also contribute to a local organization that's doing important work, or to the Athens County Housing Security Fund at the foundation, which supports efforts to combat housing insecurity. You can volunteer with local organizations who are addressing poverty in our community. And most importantly, as you are tonight, keep showing up at community meetings, at advocacy events, in conversations with your neighbors. And as Dr. Desmond said earlier today, I don't know that he said it tonight, let's also work together to cultivate a culture of celebration, to lift up and celebrate the good work that is happening in our community, to say thank you to those people who are doing that work. There are a lot of them, and there is a lot of good work happening. Along those lines, I'd like to take a moment to thank our incredible panelists for sharing their expertise and stories, to recognize the other organizations who made this event possible: Athens County Public Libraries, HAPCAP, and Ohio University College of Health Sciences and Professions. And I'd like to say a special thank you to the many members of the Planning Committee whose work is what brought us here tonight. And let's not forget, there have been hundreds of us today, here tonight and earlier this afternoon, gathered in person, watching via Zoom, who are here because we care about this issue and we care about our community. That is powerful. This is not just a lecture, not just a discussion. This is the start of something bigger. What we do next, how we take what we've learned and turn it into action, will determine the kind of community that we build together. So let's get to work. Show up, connect, volunteer, participate, contribute. Because real change happens when we move beyond awareness and into action. Thank you all so much.